Welcome to the Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. By humans, for humans, no AI-generated content. Hi, I'm Lalit Choda, founder of the Non-Human Identity Management Group. On this brand new podcast show, I'll be hosting the leading voices shaping the future of non-human and agentic AI identity. Welcome to the Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. I'm excited to have Mike Schwartz, founder and CEO of Gluu, join me for this episode. Mike, why don't you share with the audience a brief background on yourself and maybe also something interesting people may not know about you.
Hi, Lalit. It's an honor to be here. Well, just to start with my background, I started my career in investment banking. I worked for a buy-side hedge fund, and then I started an ISP in '95. After seeing outrageous valuations for these internet companies, I said, okay, I got to get into that. And I started an ISP in '95 in New York City, which I sold in '98 to Verio, a company that went public, and stayed on with Verio for a little bit, and then really spun into the identity space. In '98, I started a company called ID Vault, doing enterprise sort of B2B identity, and sort of stayed in the identity space, doing consulting for a lot of large enterprises until 2009 when I started Gluu, about 17 years ago now. And the idea with Gluu was to start an open source identity platform. I was sick of recommending these platforms that people ended up hating and ended up getting locked into. And I felt like the innovation would be better in an open source development methodology and building a community. And we set out to do that 17 years ago, and it's still the mission today. It's still what we're doing. So yeah, hope that
All
helps.
right. And anything interesting you want to share outside of that great career you've already had?
My raised pigeons. People might know that if you watch my live stream and you see the pigeons flying at the end, those are actually my pigeons. I used to fish, but then I moved too far from the salt water and had to find another hobby. So now I raise mostly white pigeons, although I have a couple of Modenas and a couple of fancy pigeons that people need a home for. I end up being you know, the home for the misfit toys. I'm kind of like the home for the misfit pigeons. If somebody's got a pigeon in the area and they don't know what to do with it, they know I have a loft, and then it ends up in my loft. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, and you touched on your show, Identity Office Hours. I think if anyone is listening to this show isn't aware of your podcast, yeah, I think it's one of the best in the industry. I actively listen to it. You got 2 shows a week, and I think you've had some great guests. You have some great discussions around identity as well. So I'd highly recommend folks also subscribe to the Mike's Identity Office Hours podcast. Great insights there from great set of thought leaders, including Mike himself. All right, look, before we get into the main discussion for this podcast, I'm going to put you in the hot seat, Mr. NHI's Human Identity in the hot seat, where I'm going to ask you 10 thought-provoking machine speed questions on identity management and security. So, Mike, are you ready?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. Are orgs taking NHI risks seriously enough?
No. If they were, they would have a methodology to evaluate the risks. They would have more transparent systems, and they'd be better at holding people accountable. So if they were serious about it, they'd be doing those things. So in my opinion, they're not really serious about it right now. They're actually somewhat hoping that it won't happen to them and sort of in denial about the risks that are out there.
Okay. Should agentic AI identities be treated separately to sort of the regular non-human identities that we know today?
I would say yes. So if we're looking at a taxonomy where software identity is at the top, we have different types of software identities, and agentic identities have their own metadata. For example, agents have capabilities. They might have models. They might have all sorts of information that are specific to agents and not to other types of software. So I think that it's important that we build systems for automatic registration of agents or ways, standard ways that agents can present their identity through attestation. But I do think that agents have specific properties that are unique, and we need specific metadata and specific processes and tokens to represent that uniqueness.
Okay, great insights. Are organizations putting time to market ahead of security controls for AI agents?
Sure, you don't mean vendors? um, no,
Well,
no
I get more organizations really as they're deploying AI
I mean,
agents.
the security, should you do it now, get customers now and ask for forgiveness later? I think that that's probably wise. Bad security didn't stop a lot of IoT devices from shipping, and I don't think we'll see different business decisions because security isn't ready.
Okay. And do you think CISOs are ready for the fleet of autonomous digital employees that are coming?
No. I mean, if they haven't done a good job figuring out how to evaluate the risks, if they haven't built transparent systems so they can see what's going on, and they can't hold people or software or business units or organizations accountable, if they can't manage trust, and if they can't create more of an operating methodology so that they can make this process continuous, then then they're not ready. And I don't see any of those systems in place. I don't think we have the identity infrastructure. I don't think we have the tokens, the flows to obtain those tokens, the ability to make policies, or the ability to govern those policies. So absolutely, CISOs are not ready.
Hey, this is a bit of more of a fun question. Do you think Mr. NHI posts too much on LinkedIn?
No, I think Mr. NHI doesn't post enough on LinkedIn. Actually, I think Mr. NHI should also get more posters to the NHI group and figure out how to get more. So no, I want more content.
Yeah, I've struggled with the NHI group in terms of people contributing. It's hard to get people to contribute in the LinkedIn forum. I think it's just challenging. But
Maybe
yeah,
Mr. NHI needs to tag more people and get them involved
could
with
be.
more content.
All right, I have to start tagging Mike more now. All right,
Yeah.
do you think zero standing privileges can work for NHIs and agents?
I think that's the wrong frame to look at it um, because the question, we shouldn't be managing the entitlements of identities. What we should be doing is looking at the action that wants to be performed on a resource and the context under which that's happening. And we shouldn't make principle or the identity the center of attention here. So I think that that question just betrays the fact that we don't understand how to scale security properly.
Okay, that's a great answer and fascinating insight. That's different
Mhm.
to many other people's view on things. So it's one of the reasons we have you here, Mike, on this show, given your unique perspectives. All right, is the recent market activity involving identity vendors like acquisitions, big fundraisers, a good thing for the industry?
Well, it's a good thing for founders who want liquidity or other reasons. The deals that I'll call attention to are Styra Apple, CyberArk Palo Alto, CrowdStrike Signal, Visa ServiceNow, and Delinea StrongDM. Those are the recent transactions that sort of
Oh,
stand out to me. And my observation is that the highest multiples were paid for companies that use either graph-based or Cedar-based authorization for their security.
okay. Do you think the AI agent digital workforce will lead to mass unemployment?
No, because humans have a huge amount of processing power. I saw this video and it talks about 1 millimeter of nice mouse brain, and it projects that that a human brain would basically take 4 million terabytes of cloud storage. And that doesn't account for the complexity of the proteins that interact with those neural connections. So humans have a huge amount of processing capacity. Our challenge is how much can we stay on task. But I don't think that AI is going to be able to deliver that value metric of processing power anytime soon.
Yeah, great answer. All right, look, this next question might be similar to the zero standing question I asked earlier, but do you think changes dramatically with the introduction of agentic AI agents?
Well, so in my jaded, cynical opinion, PAM is a connection to a legacy system, because as Alex Weinert pointed out on my IOH live stream, the old stuff never goes away. We bring in new stuff, but the old stuff's there. And so what PAM systems are is a collection of one-off connections, because the worst case in IT is managing an infinite number of one-offs. So what PAMs let you do is say, well, I have Microsoft Active Directory over here, that's still there. I have this Radius system over there. I have this thing that uses Kerberos. I'm going to like aggregate these things in one PAM. So I'm governing one PAM instead of three one-offs. And that's always going to be a good value proposition. And that's why PAMs always make business sense. Um, so the question is PAM going to change with AI agents? Well, hopefully we'll design our future systems better so they won't be one-offs and they won't need to be PAMmed in the future, is how I would answer that.
Okay, interesting. And then finally, do you think it's possible to truly govern and control agentic AI agents?
Well, we govern and control people, and AI agents are simpler than people. My take on it is that there's two approaches here. And I look at it like chess. In chess, you have an opening book, and then you go into analysis mode because the number of combinations becomes too huge.
Hmm,
So I think that with governance, we'll have similar things where we'll create a graph of all the stuff that we imagine might happen and create hard rules around that. Like we'll put up guardrails next to the hill so you can't fall over the mountain, right? However, once we get into the analysis phase, we can't really make rules about it. And so what we can do is we can punish transgressors. So we don't say we don't build guardrails so you can't murder people. But if you do murder somebody, we're going to hold you accountable for that. And so I think that the governance of AI will evolve in similar ways. There'll be some things we can hard control, and there's going to be some things that we're going to need a transparent system that give us the ability to observe transgressions and then hold systems, people, and organizations accountable. So I think the answer though is yes, we will be able to govern it because we're humans.
okay, that's a phenomenal answer. Great, great response. All right, look, I hope you enjoyed being in the hot seat, Mike. Very
Yeah.
revealing, and it's actually a good segue into the main topic today. So, look, today we're going to introduce GovOps, a security governance and compliance framework that you and many others have been kind of developing, proposing. So, look, I didn't really know much about GovOps, a few months ago. Why don't we start there? Look, or let's start first. The big question I get asked by most folks is, look, how do we govern AI agents? Clearly, it's a very broad topic from an organizational to a technical standpoint. So you've been working on GovOps. Why don't you first tell the audience what is GovOps? What is it trying to do? What problem is it trying to address?
Yeah. Um, so the place I always start is when I'm investigating this is like, okay, let's define governance itself. Like, what does that actually mean? And it's always been I hear a lot of squishy answers to that, um, and um, so I'm starting from the definition that the most important activity of governance is risk management. Like to me, governance means I can sleep at night because I'm CEO and I can sleep at night because I know we haven't mitigated all the risks out there, but I feel like we've done a good analysis and we figured out which are the biggest risks, um, and we prioritize them in a way that we've done our best to address them. Um, and yes, some little risks might slip through, but we did our best. And so to me, that's what governance means. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we get that ability to sleep at night? Like, how do we build a system that lets me sleep at night so that I know that like my biggest risks are addressed? And then in order to do that, I think, you know, we all know that like non-transparent systems are never good. Like not being able to see what the government does, that never turns out well, right? So sunlight is really important. So one of the key things is like, and then, you know, if you make an analogy to sports, like in a lot of sports, like your eyes are one of your most important muscles. Um, and so being able to see and having a transparent system is really important property for governance. And so I think figuring out how we're going to collect all of that information is key. And then finally, um, working on the assumption that things will go wrong, maybe being, you know, a pessimist and saying, okay, stuff is going to go south. And what do we do when that happens? Um, you know, how do we hold people accountable? But how do we hold the businesses? It turns out that the biggest risk today is not insider risk, it's third-party risk. And so how do we hold, yes, our workforce accountable, certainly, but how do we also hold the businesses or business units and also the software? Because maybe it's a business unit that I trust, but we have a rogue piece of software. So I think accountability is key, but accountability doesn't have to be the central unifying part of our governance strategy. I think risk management needs to be the most important part of governance. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, look, it
um,
does. I guess it's a nice intro to GovOps. But when we like now dig in a little bit deeper, what is the scope of kind of this GovOps proposal that you're developing
okay.
from, you know, is it to cover everything within an organization, or is it got more of a technology focus? Just maybe, yeah,
Fair
unpeel
enough.
the onion a little bit more so people can get to understand what is it you're trying to tackle with GovOps, uh, more specifically.
I got distracted on governance and then I forgot to answer the question about GovOps. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about GovOps. Um, so, one of my other observations about security is that security has gotten really complicated and the noise is overwhelming for humans. How many GitHub notifications do you get per day?
Hmm.
As a software vendor, I get so many. And so I think when they designed telephone numbers in the US, they figured out 10 was about the most digits like humans can process or keep in their head. So if we're going to actually govern, then we need to basically reduce some of the noise. We need to take some of that data and make it into information in order to build a methodology that the humans can consume this information and act on the important information. And so GovOps is basically the methodology of of how we're going to do that. Um, so we have a couple of objectives. So the idea is governance as ops. We've heard DevOps, SecOps, and
Yeah.
so this idea that ops is a continuous, measurable, accountable discipline that we do every day, and that we have tooling around. You know, and so, you know, my feeling is that governance went from, or in the past has been sort of a static activity where it's very tied to compliance. And I actually have sort of a theory that modern IT governance has been hijacked by compliance. because compliance, well, you absolutely need to do it. You can't like offer your product unless you're SOC 2 certified, right? So it's a must-have. Um, so I just feel like governance started out as risk management, but then get hijacked by compliance because that's what companies would actually pay for. And compliance, as you mentioned in our past conversation, is sort of backwards looking. You get audited, you show evidence, but it's sort of static and backwards looking. And the idea of GovOps is that we need a more continuous process where we introduce change, we test, we get feedback, and then we understand what the risks are, and we sort of move it forward. Um, I can pause there maybe for a second. I could go into there's 5 design principles which I could go into, but maybe I should pause there and like see if that makes sense, that part of it.
No, I think that makes sense. So talk a little bit about what is the problem you're trying to solve with GovOps. I mean, you alluded to it a little bit, but let's maybe just for the audience, like, where could be some practical examples of where sort of GovOps could be applied sort of from a kind of a security sort of IT standpoint.
Yeah. So what are we governing? We're governing authorization decisions in the IT or in the cloud infrastructure. So who can talk to what data can this software access? All of those sort of policies that enable us to comply with regulations and also to align with our business obligations. I told this partner I would share this data, but not this data. Well, there's no compliance rule about that, but there's a legal contract that says that that has to happen. So those policies for data access and system access and the obligations and restrictions that come along with that, because you might get access to data, but maybe you're restricted from using that data in a certain country. Or maybe you have an obligation to display a copyright or some type of designation if you use that data. So these types of authorization decisions become really hard to manage. The traditional approach for this was IGA, or let's say the precursor to this governance challenge is IGA, or Identity Governance Administration. And this was a
Or GR
strategy.
or GRC systems, right?
Yeah, I think of
Uh,
GRC as related,
mm,
different segment, but related in that from a GRC perspective, IGA is probably just one of the things you need to do. Um, and but IGA is really it's a good starting point. It's mostly focused on workforce identities. So what can employees in my company do? IGA tends to be like everybody's part of our organization. Even if they're a contractor, we onboard them like they're a person in our organization. Even maybe if it's an NHI, we onboard it like into our organization.
mm.
Um, and then the idea, the main strategy for IGA is role-based access control. So we inventory the people, we create a catalog of enterprise roles, we map those roles to entitlements, and then we periodically go do access certification campaigns where we email all the managers and you say, you have these reports and they currently have these roles. Is that okay? So that's sort of IGA in a nutshell. And it works well for workforce identity. But as I mentioned, the bigger risk is third-party risk, not internal risk. And then software is making this more complex. So that old IGA approach, it's still important. We still need to do it, but it's not addressing the total risk that we need to mitigate as an enterprise. And so you could say that sort of the practice of GovOps is a next-gen IGA where we say, okay, RBAC is not expressive enough for us to express all the policies we need about which systems should be able to call which systems based upon presenting what type of evidence. We can't describe the context. So it's not expressive enough to really describe, model the complexity of our IT environment. So we've built better authorization engines than RBAC. Um, and so we've built engines like Open Policy Agent has an engine that uses a policy syntax called Rego. We have the Cedar Policy Agent. We have graphs. So we have more complicated engines for expressing these policies. And so if we introduce a more complicated engine for policies, we need a more complicated governance strategy. Because how do you govern graphs? How do you govern Cedar or how do you govern OPA? That is not clear. And so it became clear to us that we needed a new sort of body of knowledge and practice around governing risk when we have more complicated authorization requirements and really the introduction of dynamic authorization engines really required a new approach to governance. And that new approach requires more automation because the humans, as I started with, they can't process all this stuff. So they need some help processing this so they can understand the massive amount of data and understand if what they say is true is actually true based upon the policies that exist in this massive network of interconnected digital services.
So is the main focus of GovOps mainly kind of for kind of software workload, non-human identity space, sort of going beyond sort of the human side of things, or is there some intersection as well
It's
between the two?
inclusive of both. Actually, there are a lot of important policies about humans. Humans are special. We have rights that software doesn't have. Um, and so understanding the humans involved in a transaction is really important. A lot of the policies might be based upon the level of assurance that we have that we actually are dealing with a human here or on behalf of a human. What type of authenticator was used? Was it a phishing resistant authenticator? Was it a shared secret? How fresh is that authentication event? Um, and claims about the human. Maybe the human presented certain verifiable credentials. Um, and so is the human authorized? Do they have a license to do this action? So there's a lot of important human factors that we need to know, but there's also a lot of important software factors. For example, I might be able to do a wire transfer from the banking mobile application, but I might not be able to do a wire transfer from the third-party banking application that can call the APIs of my bank. So Mike can do a wire transfer, but Mike can't do a wire transfer using any piece of software he wants. Um, and then can an agent of Mike do the software agent? Well, we're trying to figure out how we'd authorize something like that. But the truth is we actually have, there's many software identities that are involved. From the time the human hits OK in their browser, we have a browser software agent that's acting, that's calling an API. Then we have an API software agent that's maybe, or let's make it agentic. Let's say in my agent originates an action in my browser, and then that calls an MCP server. Now that MCP server has an identity and it calls an API. That API has an identity and it calls a database. That database looks at all of this chain of tokens and says, okay, here's the evidence that I have. Should I actually give this data or not? And so there are many identities controlled by different organizations involved. And until we can actually make policies based upon the trust that gets built up in that cryptographic chain of custody, we will be having a hard time. So we need to build these more advanced authorization systems, and then we need to build ways that humans can understand what's going on and understand the risks and hold people and software accountable when wire transfers happen that shouldn't. So
Okay. I guess to our earlier discussion, uh, when we talk about the new complex world of agentic AI, you know, everyone's asking how do you govern? I think no one's really been able to articulate a clear answer to me until probably this discussion today with how you're presenting GovOps. So it sounds like something, very lacking in the kind of industry today that I've not seen anything or described that exists out there that can handle this new AI era. Like I was reading your GovOps proposal, you talk about three core components: policy authoring, federation management, and then continuous compliance. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about those elements for
Yeah,
GovOps?
so we're trying to think about GovOps, like what are the design goals that are important to us in this new governance practice that we're trying to build. And we think of practice like IGA. Like IGA isn't a product. There's a lot of vendors out there that implement different approaches for IGA. So, but IGA, all IGA systems have certain things in common, and we're trying to think of GovOps like that. So, what are the design goals that are in there, and then what would it look like to sort of make that real? Like how do we translate into the goals that we have? How would systems actually implement that? And then finally, we would have basically how do we measure it? Because ultimately, when we're talking to the CEO, we need to present it in English in a way, and it's probably going to be numbers oriented. We want to show that we're doing better. We're covering more risks. We're reacting more quickly. We want to be able to talk about it concretely. So the services that you mentioned are just a starting point. Like we're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks and trying to figure out, how do we make this real? One of the trends in the industry that we've seen is a general agreement that central policy management makes sense. Um, Now, the vendors might disagree about how to express the policies or where the policy enforcement happens, but I think there really is consensus that policies get authored centrally and get reviewed, kind of like code. Um, so, um, so I think policy authoring um, and or a policy repository and just sort of more awareness of factoring some of the important authorization decisions out of the code and into some type of centralized reviewable format that's important. So I think that's going to, and part of the governance process is going to be using tools to analyze the policies, because if each agent or if each MCP server, API, IDP, then database has its own set of policies, we're talking about a massive number of policies. And
Oh,
we need some tooling around policy analysis. Or else, how will I know if a user can do X unless I can look at all the policies and all the different applications and figure it out? And so policy analysis and authoring is one of the keys, I think, to this. And no, we're not saying what policy syntax that should be, but we're saying that there should be some process around how policies get authored and reviewed at enterprises. And there can be lots of rooms for how that can be, including RBAC. Then federation management, I mean, I think is key. Who do I trust? So if we look at third-party risk management, we have external partner organizations who could be very important to our value chain in the ecosystem. And in this digital economy, we're interacting digitally. They're calling our APIs. They might have agents. We might have agents.
mm,
There's data flying back and forth. So there are issues about trust. If I share data with you, how do I know that you're going to protect that data? How do I know that you're going to inform me if there's a breach? How do I know that you're going to respect the obligations that come along with holding that data? And so these trust relationships need to be how we manage these trust relationships what I'm proposing is that we need more formalization in how that happens. I might call that federation. We maybe like in IGA, we were in a pre-federation world. Like in IGA, everyone was in your organization. But in GovOps, we're saying, okay, federated, everybody in our organization is just not a good model of how the world works. The internet has multiple domains connected to each other, communicating. And in the internet age, what we've found is that it's very hard for one domain to trust another domain. And we need to formalize the business process around knowing which issuers of tokens do I trust, what kinds of tokens do I trust them to issue? I trust Okta issue ID tokens because they identify my workforce, but maybe I don't trust them to issue access tokens for my internal APIs. And then finally, what claims in those tokens? Maybe I trust Okta to assert the email address, but not the roles, or I don't know, some other like esoteric piece of information. So so the trust management is important. And what was the third service? I'm forgetting.
Continuous
Um,
compliance.
okay. Well, there's a saying, never let a good compliance budget go to waste. So, but the truth is like, okay, we might say that compliance isn't good enough, but compliance is still really important. And actually still really pain in the ass. And so what I think is that we want to automate compliance and make it more like a CI/CD like process rather than have some soulless access certification campaign. May have it more of a continuous, every time we release, we generate our compliance reports. And so there's a lot of great tooling. At the CNCF, there's a project called Compass. There's also some interesting models out there now. There's a model at OpenSSF called Gamara, which is a standard model for governance and compliance. So a lot of the tooling around compliance, which maybe lived in some proprietary GRC stacks in the past, that's becoming more of an open standardized process. As we have more issues around software bill of materials, how do we trust software? We also have cryptographic bill of materials. How do we track the crypto algorithms used in these applications? And so if we want more transparency, that transparency sort of includes the systems that we're relying on and the process. So anyway, I probably went on too long there. So
No, no,
apologies.
it's fascinating. I'm sure we could speak for hours on this topic. Like I guess we've probably got like 5 or so minutes left. Back to the opening intro on GovOps. You talked about governance, and it's all about risk management. So, if we were to kind of implement some of the philosophy around GovOps, um, around policy authoring, federation management, continuous compliance. So what is it that sort of the leaders, the CISOs, security heads, the CEO, what would they effectively then be able to see and measure from a risk management standpoint?
Mm,
Let's take it with regards to, say, your tech stack and, the new agentic world. How would this help them from a governance
yeah.
standpoint? What would it tell them?
I think that what we really need is to move to a model that is more declarative, where we can say, based on the policies we have now, this is true. You will not be able to write data to an S3 bucket unless it's encrypted based on these policies that we have in place.
Oh,
So the goal is to move to a more declarative security posture for organizations. Um, the goal is also to be able to sleep at night because we actually can say to the CEO, we have a strategy that allows us to properly prioritize the risk and rewards for each capability, um, and to address them in order. And finally, we have a system in place to hold people accountable because we know things will go wrong. And we have the observability and the transparency in our systems so that we can see what's going on, detect when things go wrong, and then shut down software, shut down people's accounts, you know, turn off trust for maybe an entire domain's tokens. But we have the ability to hold people accountable based upon the systems that we've built and the leverage that we have. So that's the value proposition. In my opinion, this is existential for companies. The companies that are good at this will be prepared for this digital transformation and this agentic revolution. And the companies that don't are going to struggle. They're not going to know their risks. But even more importantly, they're going to be held back because the opportunity of agentic is that it's a board level visibility issue. Boards know, they're hearing on podcasts that if they don't do AI well, they're going to be in trouble. You know,
Hmm.
they won't be able to compete, and that's true. So the opportunity is to be able to deliver to your board this agentic opportunity execution. You're going to need to get this stuff under control because the boards also know that with agentic comes extra risk, and no one has a good answer for how to address that risk. So I think that the answer is more on the revenue side. Businesses will be able to pursue the agentic opportunities in an agentic revolution that will allow them to become leaders. Um, and and if they don't, they will also get tagged with the risks of rogue agents doing bad stuff. So
Okay. Look, it's put lots of thoughts in my head around kind of this concept you've presented. I'm just thinking of the recent breach, right, at McKinsey and the Lily AI platform. How would GovOps have helped in that scenario?
so you mentioned that we're running ahead of our skis in terms of deploying stuff, and and you know, as we saw with IoT, how many IoT devices got shipped with the password, right?
Hmm.
So bad stuff is going to, where GovOps would ideally help you identify and hold accountable when that happens, but I don't know it would prevent what's happening right now, which is chaos, which means basically like if you operate without any governance, stuff like that is going to happen. Um, but I would point out actually Sarah Cacchetti, who was formerly a Ping product manager, also was a product manager at Amazon at the Amazon Cedar Group. She's introduced an AI agent called Claudry Hepburn, which is running on her Mac Mini, I think, in her house. And Claudry Hepburn has her own LinkedIn presence, and Sarah has been experimenting with how you could create um, guardrails using Cedar to maybe prevent your agent from doing bad things. So I would say right now we're in a period where it's not clear. As I said, we don't have the agent identity, we don't have the tokens, we don't have the flows to get those tokens. We are struggling to make the policies, and then we're struggling to govern the policies. So if you had all that in place, I do think you would have a better chance at detecting anomalous behavior outside of of your allowed parameters and acting on it. Um, but what the work that Sarah's doing is interesting because I think what we're saying here is that we need to develop new strategies for how to control this. And, you know, it's easier to connect than to connect securely. And that's what we're saying. Right now, the consulting firm you mentioned, they're just connecting. Um, so we need to go to the next level where we figure out how to connect securely. And I think that's going to take a while
Hmm.
to work out the best way to do that. And so, yeah, my idea with GovOps is that we think about how we're going to govern it, which can really inform the design of how we implement it too. But if we implement without thinking about governance, then we might implement something that's non-governable. So that's just sort of an example, or I guess it's exemplary of like the state of where we are in right now.
Yeah, the one final thing that got me thinking was like, do we see like a clear an intersection between GovOps and DevOps and DevSecOps. I think of like, the whole focus now with vibe coding and, I've
Mm,
got my own thoughts on the quality of what's being produced. I just did a podcast recently and someone said, use the skateboard analogy, right? Would you try and hold your most precious things while riding a skateboard? And therefore, would you use vibe coding for your most critical systems? But I could kind of see now the picture coming together, right? Where you've got GovOps, you've got your policies defined. Then I'm assuming kind of your DevSecOps, DevOps tools, your vibe coding tools would kind of pick up from those policies around what, is good, bad, what it needs to do in terms of secure by design principles and what you can connect to and what you can do. Is that how you kind of see it kind of working in terms of intersection between like sort of a GovOps kind of
mhm.
world intersection with DevOps and DevSecOps?
Well, GovOps is ultimately for governors, and governors are humans. And right now, we're not really giving the humans good information or good tools.
Hmm.
But underlying that, the tooling part of it very much, I think, is aligned with cloud native infrastructure design and operations. Terraform is like everything's got Terraform command now. So I do think that the practice of how we roll out software, how that software uses central policy, how that software connects its streams, the decisions that it makes into threat detection and audit, all of that is very tied into cloud native operations and probably wouldn't be possible without cloud native processes, GitOps, Terraform, and all the other tools. So the IT department also needs a huge amount of operational leverage, and cloud native infrastructure gives them that operational leverage. And so I would say, in a way, emphatically, yes, it does. GovOps is designed to intersect with these practices, so that the operational team who is responsible for this massive cloud. I mean, when I say cloud, I did a Amazon mapped out how many APIs connect to how many other APIs in their e-commerce marketplace, and we're talking about like tens of thousands of interconnected services.
Hmm.
So if we're going to have a couple of humans managing that and responsible for that, we need this new cloud native ops like approach to really get it under control. So I would say yes in the alignment, but maybe also just like let's not forget about the governors, because the governors are the CISO, and the ultimate governor is the CEO, right?
Hmm.
And so we need to remember that the process is designed for humans, but the tooling very much needs to take advantage of these efficiencies in how we roll out software and manage software today.
All right, look, fascinating insights, Mike. I learned a lot today about kind of your vision for GovOps that you and many others are working on. Any other further closing thoughts you want to share with the audience, or if people want to learn a little bit more about
Mhm.
GovOps or other things you do, like your podcast, any final things you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, thank you for that. Identity office hours. If you Google that, we're on YouTube and LinkedIn, so please follow. It's a lot of weird content. We do it twice a week. Anything of interest to identity architects, authorization, identity federation, governance. It's fair game on identity office hours. I'll be at Identiverse. If you want to meet me, I'll be at Identiverse this year. Unfortunately, I can't make it to EIC unless somebody wants to buy me a ticket, then maybe I can afford to go, but not going to EIC this year. Um, and what else? GovOps as a group is not actually formed yet. We have written a proposal to form this group at the Open SSF, which is chartered under the Linux Foundation. As a backup plan, if we can't get sponsorship at OpenSSF, we're looking at OWASP, which is a very like distributed global group of like
Mm.
developers, and it aligns well with sort of building the practice that we want to do. So that's the backup plan. When we finally get a home, um, we will make an announcement on LinkedIn. We actually have a GovOps group that formed. I took your lead because I've never created a group before. We also have a GovOps organization on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn or send me a connection request. Um, and we will probably have spam you guys with a couple of GovOps IOH episodes too. So it'll be hard to miss, but I'm hoping we find a final home like this month and are able to announce and then really invite the community to join us and start moving this forward. We're going to do, I think, 5 or 6 meetings a month and try and move some actual work to the finish line, and the hard part will start. So, but thank
All
you
right.
so much to the lead for this opportunity, and looking forward to the next time. I hope there is a next time.
Yeah, definitely will be. Again, thanks for sharing your vision with you and your colleagues on GovOps. I think it's much needed in the industry, and yeah, happy to follow and promote what you're doing in this space. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's episode. Please subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. You can also view much of our content on NHI's and Agentic AI at nhimg.org. And if you want to learn how to manage and potentially govern non-human identities, you can also look at our training course, nhitraining.org. So with that, Mike, a real pleasure. Thanks for today's session. Really enjoyed it. And I'm sure we'll see each other very soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.